Bah, this is taking forever. I ought to make something else in time for Sunday. That one. First and foremost, we must know what about we are even talking in the slightest. The gist of what I wish to suppose is the creation of a greater Bulgarian state, a nation stretching from the Danube in the north to the Aegean in the south, and from the Black Sea in the east to roughly the Adriatic and the Drin and the Great Morava in the west. And precisely so I wish to suppose the creation, to give an account of causal time which gives Bulgaria the opportunity to rise to greatness. So, in that sense, sorry to that one commenter, I'll do half of what you asked. But the aim of relative reason rules out the remedification of prehistoric Bulgarian lands. Now, as we don't really know what the future holds, let's look into history. By all accounts, we could start in 1878 in the aftermath of the Russo-Ottoman War, but let's instead start in 1912 with the First Balkan War, as to stay in terms of a more familiar Bulgaria. For those unfamiliar, the First Balkan War pitted the Bulgarians, the Serbians, the Montenegrins and the Greeks against the Ottomans, in the former's final war of independence against the empire. It concretely marked the end of Ottoman rule within Europe proper, well, almost, and truly proved how ill the sick man of Europe was. Now, the First Balkan War was a victory for the Bulgarians and the coalition, so it's not precisely what I'm getting at to change. Rather, what needs changing is the Second Balkan War, which happened mere months after the first and pitted the Romanians, Serbians, Greeks and Ottomans against the Bulgarians, and ended in the victory of the coalition. It suffices to say such is less than optimal. We could of course suppose the Second Balkan War never happens, but let's be more fun. Let us suppose against all odds the Bulgarians win it. To that end we must skew the board more in favor of the Bulgarians, which means we must suppose a more favorable outcome in the First Balkan War. And to that end we must skew the board in favor of Bulgaria, to make the Bulgarians more confident in the military incompetence of the Ottomans so as to further try to blockade the advances of their allies into Macedonia. Now, of course, such a strategic play from the Bulgarians makes little sense. If the Ottomans truly are weaker, why march into Macedonia and Thessaloniki instead of on to Constantinople? Well, let us say that the Bulgarian High Command not only has some esoteric hindsight, but also that Russia threatens the Bulgarians more sternly with intervention should they cross too near Constantinople, since it is a city long sought after by Russia, and that the Bulgarians heed the warning. Verily then, in this we have our first divergence in the timeline, far increased Russo-Bulgarian relations. Really, I don't think that needs much explanation. The Bulgarians and Russians were quite cordial in our timeline, but the issue of Russian interests in Serbia forced a wedge between the Bulgarians and Russians. So here, to increase relations, let's say that Ferdinand I and Nicholas II are the very bestest of pals. Perhaps, just perhaps enough so that Ferdinand sometime even joins Nicholas on a rowboat trip. For an additional benefit from this, we'll say that Russia backs Bulgaria more staunchly in dealing with the issue of the Romanian border between the First and Second Balkan War, but more on that in just a bit. For our next, or well, technically first divergence in our timeline, let's return to October 1912, to the very start of the First Balkan War, and to the end of the Italo-Ottoman War of 1911. Now, while the Italo-Turkish War was really only about Libya, it wasn't exactly poised to end as early as it did in our timeline, even with Libya rather fallen to Italian hands. The sudden start of the First Balkan War forced the Ottomans to make peace with Italy, lest they surely lose all of their possessions in the Balkans. For this timeline, we'll simply say that the Ottomans are far more stubborn. To make that a bit more realistic though, we'll say that the Italians have a hard time conquering Tobruk, for example, because the Ottomans sent a far lesser amount of their military garrison therefrom onto Yemen to quell rebellion. And regardless, the Balkan League is confident enough in being able to overpower the Ottomans as to still remain, while the Ottomans are proud enough to believe their victory possible against both the Balkan and Italy. As for Bulgarian military strategy, my, how I totally would love to get into a precise and methodical alternate order of operations. But it simply seems I don't have the time, so, in a gist, since we are supposing the Bulgarians don't dare try to conquer Constantinople, we can safely say the First and Third Armies never initiate the First Battle of Katalka, on the outskirts of the city. Rather, The center of the Bulgarian focus in threat should and shall be supposed to keep in the siege of Adrianople. Without a need for a push deeper into the Ottoman Empire proper, let us say, for example, that a division is taken from either or from both the 1st and 3rd Army and allocated to work along with the independently acting 7th and 9th Infantry Divisions in Macedonia, forming with all of them together the 4th Army. Much the war passes the same as it did in our timeline, and the Ottomans are forced to give in just before June 1913. The only differences that we'll say is that Bulgaria advances further west, well over Kavala and Ceres in Greece, right on the cusp of Thessaloniki, as well as into Veles in North Macedonia and Edessa in Greek Macedonia. In addition, with Italy continuing on to fight the Ottomans longer, that war ending only with the First Balkan, we'll say that Italy gains all the land it did in the Italo-Turkish War of our timeline, as well as a strip of Albania. Now, as peace comes to pass, the Austrians will immediately take issue with the Italian acquisition of Albania, since it allows the Italians to block their access into the Mediterranean far more easily. Additionally, the Austrians don't take kindly to the Serbians having Adriatic access. To resolve these minor issues, a compromise is reached in London. Albania gains its total independence from Italy, and the minor strip around the Vlore, which it is as a nation, is expanded along the Adriatic coast to Montenegro. Though with the Bulgarians more present in Macedonia, Serbia demands more land in Albania, and the nation in London doesn't get quite as much in the east of modern-day Albania, its eastern border verily falling just to the east of Elbasan. All this will be more useful later. Meanwhile, a new war is brewing between the Bulgarians and the Serbians, as they simply cannot agree where to draw the Macedonian border. We won't really change the timeline on that front. However, on the issue of Romanian and Bulgarian border, we must. Now, Romania didn't join the First Balkan War because it had no real interests in Ottoman Macedonia, while really only wanting land from Bulgaria, a member of the Balkan League pinned against the Ottomans in the war. Instead of direct intervention against the whole Balkan League, Romania opted to stay neutral on the clause of Bulgarian territorial compensation after the war. Namely, the Romanians sought the fort city of Silistra along the Danube, as well as the approximate region of southern Dobruja. In our timeline, come the end of the First Balkan War, the Bulgarians refused to acquiesce this territory to the Romanians, instead wanting not to cede any land whatsoever. So to try to form peace between the two nations, Russia stepped in and a weak compromise was drafted in St. Petersburg. I don't really want to change the outcome of this resolution in any significant regard, but simply have it stick. So to achieve that aim, let us suppose a sort of unusual additional clause to the terms of the resolution, at least for the time. Per the Protocol of St. Petersburg in 1913, then, Bulgaria is not only to sell Silistra, Kalipetrovo and Adimir to Romania, but the Bulgarian-Russian defensive treaty is formalized, certainly over this one issue. Should the protocol be broken by Romania, Russia would intervene, but should Bulgaria break it, Russia will stay neutral. The slight issue posed by the secret Romanian-Austrian defensive agreement is nothing at all, since it was secret and by all accounts moot by this time, since the Romanians had far more interests against the forming Triple Alliance, and more specifically against Austria, than in line with it. Proof of this is simply that Romania joined the war against the Central Powers. Anyhow, come late June 1913, the Bulgarians unlawfully attacked Serbian and Greek forces in disputed Macedonian territories, that is, without a formal declaration of war. Just to note, the cause of these territorial disputes is the Serbians going against their word, occupying territories which were to be awarded to the Bulgarians after the Ottoman War, per a secret treaty signed before it. Anyhow, as this is an offensive operation by Bulgaria, the Russians do not intervene on either side. We'll say that this decision of non-intervention from Russia is the final catalyst for the crumbling of Bulgarian trust of the Russians, and enough of a catalyst to push the Bulgarians to different political sides later on, but more on that of course later. As the Romanians fear the Russians more staunchly now due to the protocol signed just a month prior, they dared not intervene on the Greco-Bulgarian side, as they did in our timeline. Additionally, let us suppose the Ottomans, instead of just outright invading Bulgaria to reclaim Thracian territories, send an ultimatum instead, return Adrianople or face war, and that the Bulgarians, rather reluctantly, but realistically estimating the threat of another front on the war, agree. I'd argue that even these changes, a lack of both Romanian and Ottoman intervention, is enough reason for the Bulgarians to win against the Serbians and Greeks, especially if we consider that the Bulgarians already have more forces in Macedonia at the beginning of the war, with them not having been demobilized after the First Balkan War, and if we further remember that the Bulgarians are already standing on better footing further into Macedonia. Concretely, after their victory, the Bulgarians don't go on to annex very significant territories from the Greeks and Serbians, per international pressure, but rather simply to reaffirm their claims in Macedonia, though we'll say that the Bulgarians take a bit as well, namely Skopje and Thessaloniki, or Solun as they call it. For the next year, the world proceeds on pretty much as it did in our timeline, but some minor governmental changes can be expected in Serbia and Greece. Come the 28th of June 1914, the Archduke of Austria, Franz Ferdinand, is assassinated in Bosnia by Black Hand terrorists backed by the Serbians. Austria sends an ultimatum to Serbia, namely to investigate the assassination, but effectively demanding suzerainty over the whole nation, and Serbia refuses. Austria declares war on Serbia, Russia on Austria, Germany on Russia, France on Germany, and so forth, and the Great War begins. A year into the war, the Bulgarians join on their side of the Central Powers. No, we are not doing Entente Bulgaria. That's cringe. Instead, let's suppose a Central Powers victory, because that's obviously far less cringe. Now, since it's not a video about a Central Powers victory, we lazily paste our timeline upon a basic broad German World War I victory timeline, with pretty much the entire Balkan situation from Kaiserreich. The continuing Serbian resistance against the Austrians is swiftly crushed as the Bulgarians join. The Serbian retreat into Albania draws the nation in the midst of total chaos into the war as well, swiftly to be occupied by the Bulgarians and Austrians. With Greece having increased enmity against the Bulgarians, they joined the war early. We'll say just months after Bulgaria, in early 1916. With the difficult terrain of Achaia, the front stalls for the rest of the war. Come August, the Romanians join the war against the Central Powers, and are swiftly overrun. Come spring 1919, the Germans finally manage to march into Paris, and the war ends in Central Powers victory. Relevantly for us, the Bulgarians annex Romania northern Dobruja, Serbia up to the Morava River, and Greek Macedonia. Austria gains nominal suzerainty over what is left of Serbia, Albania, and Greece. In actuality, though, these nations act independently from the very start of the interwar, only to declare total independence come 1927, in a moment of Austrian weakness. See, we'll say that the Austrians start to push for true federalism within the empire in the Ausgleich of 1917, a decadely meeting between the constituent nations under the Austrian crown over economic and political affairs. Now the agreements go nowhere in 1917, since Austria and Hungary are rather equally influential. Reform, however, is absolutely vital for the survival of the empire, so after the war, we'll say in 1922 or so, the Austrians split their portion of the empire into the kingdoms of Austria, Bohemia, Galicia, and Illyria. Come the Ausgleich of 1927 then, the Austrians can push federationist reform through, and do so very aggressively, prompting Hungarian revolution, as they don't want to lose the lands demanded as terms for the federalization of the empire. With the aid of the Germans, the Austrian faction wins the civil war, and Hungary is forced to acquiesce to cede lands to aid the federalization effort. But in the meanwhile, the Serbians, Albanians, and Greeks declared true independence, and within a matter of months, form an alliance to invade the Bulgarians to reclaim their lost lands. To seize the opportunity to reclaim their lost lands as well, the Romanians comorbidly invade the Bulgarians from the north. The Ottomans again send another ultimatum to demand more Thracian land, which the proud Bulgarians are inclined to refuse, but the Germans step in, trying to keep up increasingly disappearing notions of the Central Powers alliance, demanding the Bulgarians to agree to sell Western Thrace in exchange for German assistance against the Balkan League. The Bulgarians reluctantly agree, and Ottoman-Bulgarian war is avoided, but tensions rise between the two nations. For the first months of the war, the Bulgarians take a defensive stance against the Serbians, Albanians, and Greeks, while taking a more offensive stance against the Romanians, the biggest threat of the coalition. The Romanian revanchist sentiment forces their hand to offensive operations from the get-go, which the Bulgarians, with some profound strategic acuity in the moment, can exploit. The Romanians managed to cross the Danube in the southern part of Dobruja to try to cut off the entire region from Bulgaria proper in an awfully costly offensive operation, whereafter the Bulgarians managed to encircle the Romanian offensive force and themselves crossed the Danube to march on to Bucharest, march on to Ploesti and Targoviste, cutting off Wallachia from Moldavia, and the Romanians sue for peace. Thereafter come about June or so of 1928, about 8 or 10 months after the start of the war and about a year after the Balkan League declared full independence from Austria. The Austrians and Germans joined the war against the Balkan League to restore the status quo of Central Powers' dominance in the Balkan. The Serbians, the Albanians and the Greeks are quickly subdued, in that order. The war ends in only unconditional surrender of the remaining powers. In the peace, the Bulgarians annexed Kosovo, most of Albania and Greek Epirus. The Austrians for their part annexed Montenegro, northern Albania up to the Rin River, the Albanian city of Vlore, and the Ionian islands from Greece, as well as puppeting what little is left of Serbia and Greece. For our final act we move on to 1933, 2 years after the Berlin stock market crash of 1931 and its subsequent worldwide economic depression. The Ottomans, already a crumbling nation, get more and more unstable in the fallout of the economic freefall. Tensions increase among the ranks of the ethno-linguistic minorities of the empire, and the Egyptians are the first to declare their independence. Yemen and Jabal Shammah quickly follow suit, and thereafter major revolutions begin in the regions of Syria, Iraq, Hejaz and Kurdistan. To add insult to injury, the Persians and the Omani also declare war on the Ottomans, seeking to increase their influence in the Middle East. Finally, after a month or few, the Bulgarians join the fray, to reclaim Thrace and conquer Constantinople. The Germans protest but do not intervene, being too shaken by the economic crash. After only a matter of months, the Ottoman Empire is forced to cede the vast majority of their empire to foreign powers. Significantly for us, Bulgaria reclaims its former Thracian territories, as well as Constantinople and Kanakkale, to secure the Straits. Bulgaria goes on to join the Reichspakt to win the Second Great War, and secures its total grip over the South Balkan for the latter part of the 20th century up to even the contemporary. Bulgaria grows to be a wealthy nation and a conservative authoritarian democracy, and among one of the wealthiest and most militarily powerful nations in Middle Europa and Europe as a whole. Ferdinand I is hailed as the father of modern Bulgaria, and the man who made a meager Ottoman province into the Prussia and the Belgium of the Balkans in one. Alright, this might have been a tad unrealistic, but oh well. See you next time. Bye.